Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Aaron from onlineapologetics.com. I'm here with my good friend Cairo. We're here at Michigan State University, and we're going to talk about some new evidence for God that I think will blow your mind. I think it's really amazing. Cairo here is a kinesiology major, and he's really
Yep.
smart, and he understands the human body. He did this to me recently, and he showed me this really amazing thing that I think is some great evidence for God. So, Cairo, you want to show everyone out there what this great evidence for God is? Want to show them?
Okay. So,
So that's it. That's the new evidence for God is that Cairo just flexed his biceps. So I'm going to let my friend Cairo, who's really smart, explain to you what just happened in that move right there. So Cairo, take it away.
okay. So, first step is you wanted to move your bicep, and that gave you a thought, and that was deals with the brain. And I won't talk to you about that, but I'll talk about the first neuron. So once that brain sends a signal to the neuron, it sends. Actually, before I want to get into it, just a few things that you need to understand first. One, this it has to deal with sodium and potassium, and there's a lot of sodium outside of a cell. There's a lot of potassium inside the cell. So potassium always wants to go outside. Sodium always wants to come in, but the cell doesn't let it. And it does that because it has receptors that keep pushing sodium out and pulling potassium in. And so also the cell itself is -70. That's its electrostatic charge. And both sodium and potassium are positive, so they repel each other. So keeping those in mind, that's few things that you just need to understand. So basically, the once you get that, once the first neuron gets activated, the brain sends a chemical to a ligand-gated sodium channel, and once this channel opens, the sodium comes in a little bit. So the cell, since sodium is positive, the cell goes from -70 to -60. And they call that a graded potential. And so that the neuron in the head becomes slowly -60, and that travels. And since there's more sodium in it, it pushes the potassium away, and it becomes -60 slowly down until it comes to the tail of the neuron. And at one point in the neuron, if it reaches -60, something called voltage gated sodium channels open. And once these open, a whole bunch of sodium comes in. And this causes the cell to go from -60 to +30. So it's a huge change. And all that sodium pushes the potassium even further down the tail until, and once it pushes it further, it doesn't say +30. It starts spreading out again. The charge spreads out some more, and it becomes -60 at the next checkpoint, you can call it. And once it reaches -60 there, voltage gated sodium channel opens, whole bunch of sodium comes in, pushes potassium even farther, and that just keeps happening hundreds of times throughout the length of the neuron from your brain to your spine. And they call it an action potential. And once it reaches your spine, it transfers that. Once it finally reaches the end of the neuron, it reaches that -60 at the end of the neuron. It brings in calcium, and calcium comes in and it binds to these bubbles that have neurotransmitters at the end of the neuron.
So
These
it's
neurotransmitters.
not like a bubble, that kind of
No, it's an
bubble.
actual bubble and it has neurotransmitters inside of it, and calcium binds to it. Allows it to leave the neuron, and it leaves the neuron, and the neuron ends right here, and there's another neuron right next to it. And those transmitters go onto that neuron, which open, like from the beginning, ligand-gated sodium channels, which make the graded potential, which make the action potential all the way down through our arm into our bicep. And it does the exact same process with bringing in sodium, pushing potassium farther, bringing in sodium. And finally, in the muscle, there's many layers to it because we put a lot of strain on our muscle, so there's multiple layers. And the layer that the nerve touches is the myofiber layer, the muscle cell, the actual cell. And it attaches, there's millions of cells in one muscle, and it goes all the whole length of the entire muscle. And the neuron attaches to multiple of these, maybe not all of them, but it attaches to many of them. And when it attaches to them, it does something kind of similar, but it also is slightly different than a neuron. So once it releases those neurotransmitters, this neuron releases those neurotransmitters on the cells, it opens up, once again, ligand-gated sodium channels and this is actually the muscle cell, ligand-gated sodium channels into the muscle cell. So sodium comes in, makes the cell -60, and that pushes potassium out a little bit farther until it reaches another part, just like the neuron, until it reaches those voltage-gated sodium channels. So once those voltage-gated sodium channels, that area goes from -70 to -60, a whole bunch of sodium comes in, and it goes all the way to +30. And that happens all the way into the muscle cell, and this is where it's different for the muscle. And they call it T-tubules. So a muscle cell is a long fiber, and you have a whole bunch of things going inside the muscle and inside the muscle, and so one of these things they call them T-tubules. And that action potential keeps going down where sodium keeps coming in +30, push potassium away, and then -60 reaches the next ligand gated or voltage gated sodium channel, +30 because all the sodium comes in, and it reaches them and it goes inside the cell down the T-tubule, and it reaches a receptor called DHCP. And this receptor, once it reaches -60, it opens up. And once that opens, it is directly connected to a gate, an RY gate. And this RY gate opens. And once that RY gate opens, a whole bunch of calcium flows into the muscle. And I'll get back on why that is important. But the actual parts, when you contract a muscle, it gets shorter. And there's two fibers that are responsible for this. This is called actin and myosin. And myosin, what it will eventually do is it'll pull actin towards it. But it can't do that because there's things surrounding actin. And the two things that are surrounding actin are tropomyosin and troponin. So tropomyosin is surrounding the entire thing, and it's blocking where myosin can pull it towards. And the thing that's causing tropomyosin to stay on actin is troponin. And those are the small particles on the thing. So when calcium flies into the muscle cell, it binds to all the troponins on tropomyosin. So now the troponins are off of it. Tropomyosin moves, and now myosin can finally bind to the actin and pull it close. So as soon as tropomyosin moves, the myosin head grabs onto the actin, and however it's stuck there, it has a molecule on the myosin head, ADP and P, and it's stuck there. Once those leave, they have to leave. Once those leave, it pulls it close. But now it's stuck in this position as well. So now ATP, which is a lot of people know what ATP is. ATP is basically energy. It has to come in and it has to bind to the myosin head and it lets go. But then ATP needs to turn back into ADP and P, and it relaxes, goes back to here, grabs onto here, and ADP and P fall off, go there. ATP has to come, and it just keeps doing that process, and that's why a bicep can get shorter. When it can start from here and it gets shorter. And however, obviously you don't want your bicep to stay there. You want it back to relax. So once the muscle cell can sense when there's a lot of calcium in the air or in the interstitial fluid, when there's a lot of calcium in the cell, there's things called cercoreceptors where they can sense this, and once it reaches too much calcium, it targets receptors that pull all the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and they pull them all back into there, and then tropomyosin goes back onto actin, troponin goes back on actin, and then myosin can't hold on to anymore, so they go back to their resting length, and that's when your bicep relaxes. And that is pretty much the entire process of how much work goes behind doing this.
You made it sound like a really long story, but all that happens in literally a second, less than a second.
That same process happens in our mouth. We have muscles in our mouth that help me to be able to talk, to be able to use my hands to look, to communicate. and all those things are happening all over our body. And it took me about, I don't know how long that was, 10 minutes,
Yeah.
15 minutes. It took me that long to say that whole process. And our body does it not only in milliseconds, but it does it all over our body to where they can sync and to do things. Like I can now grab things. I can use my arm to grab things. I can use my finger muscles to precisely do things. And it uses all those things in sync with each other so we can actually do movements and walk and talk with our mouth.
Wow. And I think what's really cool is that it all begins with a thought. It begins with a decision, right? So if I decide to do this, it's like, what's the I? The I is the invisible spiritual part of us that people call the soul. So if I do this, or I do this, or I do this, it's like, what's the I? I mean, does your professors tell you what the
Yes,
I is?
that if he did, that'd be way above our class. But even then, we have many reflexes, like the knee-jerk reflex, where um, a doctor will hit your knee and your knee immediately kicks out. That's a reflex, but the doctor was initiating that reflex. So it goes out into our brain, and our brain sends out to kick it out. But when we're just doing voluntarily movement, like I just want to lift up my arm for no reason, there's the brain doesn't tell you to do that. You're the one who chose to do that.
Yeah, so there's the you, which is what's the you, who's the you, which is the consciousness. So the consciousness is the invisible part of us that scientists are still trying to figure out the consciousness. How does that happen? Who is the you? But then you have the brain and then all the physical stuff that happens literally like you just explained in literally a second.
Milliseconds.
So, you know, some people say evolution did all that. What do you think?
And I know a lot of people, a lot of like the smarter you get, it seems, the smarter people get, the more they think that, evolution and the world was created by a big bang and all that. But the more I go into this health field and see all the process of what it takes to just curl my bicep, how much the entire process of that, I just see it like if any one of those things did not work, like if any one of those things, if one of the voltage gated sodium channels along our neuron
Yeah.
that I talked about, if that didn't work, we would not be able to do this if one of them messed up. That's all it takes is just one thing out of that entire 10
Really?
minutes. Just if one thing messed up, you wouldn't get it. And the fact that that doesn't happen, and the fact that everything just happens so perfectly,
Yeah.
that it's just insane to believe that it could just happen by chance. There's just way too many, and that's just one system. That's just moving your bicep. I've learned many things about your heart, your lungs, your respiratory, your digestive system, learning about all the hormones that cause all these different reactions in our body is just as difficult as that process right there. And it's just happening constantly through our body, and you don't even think about it. And it's just happening constantly in our body, and it's working perfectly. And to think that it all happened by chance takes more faith than to believe a God actually created all of it.
So some people say that it takes a lot of faith to be an atheist, to me, to believe that everything happened by
I've,
itself.
I'd say I don't have enough faith to be an atheist because it just happened. Think about it, and just to think that it all happened by chance it's just crazy to think that all of it just happened so perfectly.
Well, that was really good. That was excellent how you explained all that. It's
I
amazing.
probably missed a couple things here and there, but
But even if you did miss a couple of things, it would just add on to the complexity,
yeah, I
right?
definitely left out a lot of steps too.
Yeah. Well, I hope that helps. Hope to give you something to think about. No mean comments. Even if you do, that's okay. I'll forgive you because I'm a Christian. But hope it will help you think about God and think about how amazing our bodies are. We take for granted every day, right?
Yeah,
So that same process is literally like if our eye blinks.
that same processes
That
are
same,
happening in
all that happens
in
is just like
hundreds of muscles.
hundreds of muscles.
Are using it just to
Okay.
blink your eye. There's like 6 muscles that make up the eye, and for
Yeah.
me to look at you to the camera, all those 6 muscles have to work in sync. and perfectly and precise.
And all those chemical processes have to happen just
Yeah,
like
just
that.
like that for all 6 of those
Wow.
muscles.
That's amazing. Well, I hope that helps. Give you something to think about, and have a good day.